think I got this thing turned on, so I guess we're just gonna let this thing ride. So, what's going on? My name is Blake Hampton, and I'm the head of analytics with the Undroppables. You can go ahead and find my work at Twitter at Blake A. Hampton, and then you can find the work of all the great guys who are putting out smart content over at the Undroppables. Also, website can'tcutlist.com. Highly recommend you go check it out. As I said, there's guys who are putting out some really good smart content out there. So, hope you guys go check it out. There's some really cool stuff that's also coming up. We're rolling out a podcast here pretty soon with two of the most enjoyable personalities that I find on the fantasy football platform. It's going to be called Unscripted. It's coming out pretty soon. They just recorded this last week, so hopefully that's going to be dropping soon. And we have some really cool projects that we're coming up with. We have a trade calculator that's in the works. We have an option that y'all can go upload your rosters to kind of perform a league analyzer, evaluate your team, and it's going to have some pretty cool features. So hope you guys go check it out. We have some really cool stuff on the horizon. A little bit about myself, because there's probably not too much background on me, since I'm pretty new in the community, but I'm a mechanical engineer by degree. I do have that is my full-time job. I do also have a minor in statistics. Took a couple years of advanced statistical analysis, differential equations, and different numerical analysis courses. So just started getting into the fantasy football analytics probably 3 months ago. Used to use it for sports gambling, for own self-profit, but I started looking at my own stuff comparatively to those who are some of the best in the industry, and I thought, hey, my stuff is just as good, if not better than some of the best guys out here. So thought I'd give it a shot at putting out content. So things are going really great, and I really appreciate the Undroppables for help support that. But some questions and answers here that I'll go ahead and just start going through. We'll go ahead and start at the top question from DJ Weeze. Is there anyone you're targeting earlier than rankings/ADP show? Don't mean 1 or 2 picks early. I'm talking league mates frantically flipping through cheat sheets early. Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be kind of the foundation of everything I'm going to be talking about in terms of grabbing value and where does value lie. Because if you're picking someone in a round that you're needing to flip through cheat sheets to go find, that's not a value pick, right? You can wait rounds, go get that guy. But I will be talking. I got a couple guys here that I really like. That's kind of in the earlier rounds. I'm willing to grab before kind of their main ADP comes up. So on the wide receiver side, Scott Barrett over at Fantasy Points. If you don't follow him, you should be going and following him. He puts out really smart content. So he put together an entire list of traits, statistics that season a wide receiver puts out that correlates to fantasy points. And I don't think it should be a shock to anyone that the major aspects that correlates highest to fantasy points per game is yards and targets. Obviously, volume equals fantasy points. So 2 players that I am going to be grabbing earlier than others is, of course, Allen Robinson. He had 153 targets last year. One of the major things that I like looking at is obviously the targets, and then red zone receptions along with that. So he had 153 targets. They really brought in no one of consequence to match him. I don't consider Jimmy Graham any sort of concerning factor to that Bears offense. And also the 11 red zone receptions. I mean, who else are they going to have there? Is Tariq Cohen going to all of a sudden start getting all these red zone receptions? And then an 11.5 average depth of target. That's actually really low for a player like Allen Robinson. That's not something that's a sticky statistical analytic that you can go from year to year. And if Nick Foles does end up taking over that role, I see it going up significantly. So I think even though he had such a great year last year, I think there's potential for him to expand even more. As you can see in my predictive model has him all the way up at 4th or 5th. I think there's potential for him to be really, really good this year. Another player I'm willing to take early, Courtland Sutton. A lot of people are concerned about all the pieces that they drafted. Let's keep in mind he had 126 targets last year and 11 red zone receptions as well. And also, he had a really low average depth of target as well with 10.7 yards per target. I think that goes up with Drew Lock playing YOLO ball for his B spot. And let's keep in mind that all the players that are currently on the Broncos, they're all rookies, right? And so there's a transition period that occurs there for rookies. And so, with Courtland Sutton getting 126 targets, I think he'll be kind of a safety blanket for Drew Lock. I don't see that going down very much. I see that kind of being sustained. His ADP seems to be dropping a little bit because everyone's concerned about the other pieces they added. But, he could be the main red zone threat while also maintaining huge target volume. On the running back side, I really like Clyde EdwardsHelaire. This has kind of been something that's been growing on me quite a bit. I'm willing to take him in the first round in redraft leagues. If you're towards the end of the first round, I'm willing to snatch him up there. One of the things about that people are concerned about is his athletic profile, and I'm really not, because he may be small, but he has a really high BMI. So he's very stocky. And one of my favorite things to compare him against is Miles Sanders, right? People say that Miles Sanders is a bigger player than him, but Miles Sanders has a 35th percentile BMI, while Clyde EdwardsHelaire is a 98th percentile BMI. So actually, there's a chance that Clyde EdwardsHelaire is actually able to sustain the heavy aspect of the running back position than Miles Sanders overall. In college, we can all say that they both had one-season wonders. I don't really care that one was behind Saquon Barkley and one was behind Nick Brossette. But overall, Clyde EdwardsHelaire had a much higher average dominator rating, which is the dominator rating is the percentage of passing yards and rushing yards for a team. And then one of the things that I really like to look at from college production standpoint is yards per offensive attempt. And so, even though LSU had a really high tempo offense and one of the most elite offensive seasons we've ever seen for collegiate football, he had the same yards per offensive attempt than Miles Sanders. And that's really, it really has nothing to do with the offensive tempo, the offensive yard. It's just how involved is a player with that offense. And so those Miles Sanders and Clyde EdwardsHelaire having a very similar number there, that makes me think that in terms of production standpoint, you can say that they're pretty equivalent. So I'm not concerned about the athletic profile. He actually Clyde EdwardsHelaire actually has an elite burst score, which is actually what gives Alvin Kamara his edge, that he's able to burst upfield. So him having an elite burst score, high BMI, I'm not concerned about his athletic profile whatsoever. I like to think that he's just a more explosive version of Mark Ingram. The way that he's structured, high BMI, smaller guy, but explodes upfield and can catch the ball. So that's kind of my little preliminary comp here. As a late round option, I actually have, this is going to be very on brand for me, is Dare Ogunbowale. I hate the running back situation over there in Tampa Bay. Keyshawn Vaughn and Ronald Jones, I think it's going to be the ugliest slugfest out there. And at the end of the day, we're going to look back and we're going to think, oh, look, Dare Ogunbowale was just a bigger version of James White. Actually, ironically enough, they went to the same college of Wisconsin. So that's a ironic similarity there. One of the cool things about Dare Ogunbowale, because he's so involved in the passing game, he actually had 1.32 fantasy points per opportunity. And that actually ranked 10th overall last season. And then on top of that, one of the interesting things, although this doesn't correlate season to season, it is interesting to see this. He ranked in the top 20 last year in goal line carries. So he's not going to be like a 10th round pick. He's going to be one of your last picks. I just got him in the 26th round of a dynasty startup. But at the end of the day, he may be the most consistent guy out there for Tampa Bay. So he's kind of the guy who if you're talking about just late round guys who people are flipping through your cheat sheets, he's kind of my go-to there. Next question. Sorry, that was long. I'll try to shorten these up a little bit. From Tart, who are you picking with your last pick, aka players that are going undrafted and shouldn't be? I guess it kind of depends on when your last pick is and if this is dynasty or if this is redraft. Two guys I really like right now that I'm kind of trying to snatch up in every league is JaMycal Hasty, undrafted running back out of Baylor. He goes to the 49ers. One of the things about the 49ers is they have this stretch zone run scheme that you really don't need to be a talented running back, to be honest with you. You really just need to have elite burst and just kind of a fearlessness to go hit that hole. I mean, they've shown that you could just go throw any explosive undrafted running back into that scheme and they're going to be successful. And so right now they have Raheem Mostert, and he's really small. I think he's like 180, 190 pounds with like a 10th percentile BMI. JaMycal Hasty, he's much bigger. He's 205 and has a 75th, 80th percentile BMI. And then he also has a 90th percentile burst. And so I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season we're looking back and JaMycal Hasty is running that backfield. So, you just need to have those two traits to be successful in that Kyle Shanahan run offense. And, we may be looking back and thinking, how did we possibly miss this one? The other late round pick, the last pick that I'm willing to spend is Joe Reed with the LA Chargers. I always want to say San Diego there. But he was a 5th round pick out of Virginia, so he's not undrafted. They actually use draft capital on him. And the Chargers have no wide receiver depth. Right now they have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Henry, tight end. But I mean, Joe Reed could literally step in and start right away in a 3rd receiver spot. He's a big dude, 6'1", 224, and he has a 95th percentile speed score. He's on player profile, he's best comparable to Jacoby Jones. And although, the athletic measurables don't mean much, opportunity does. If he's able to get in there and start right away, I mean, that's opportunity. So those two guys are kind of who I'm targeting here with kind of my last round picks. Let's see. Pro casual. Follow up to that. Who is a good player to draft late that will either show something week 1 or be an easy dump for waivers? Okay, so 3 guys that kind of fit into this category for me. I really think it's those boom bust guys, right? So 3 players that I really imagine is Deshaun Jackson, Sammy Watkins, and John Ross. And so, as I said, they're extremely boom bust players. But one of the fun things about last year is the top 2 scoring wide receivers week 1, Deshaun Jackson and Sammy Watkins. Obviously, Deshaun Jackson has not been the epitome of health for his career. I don't think he's played 16 games in like 7-8 years. So that's obviously something to be concerned about. But that's someone that I'm willing to snag pretty late because you never know with the depth out there in Philadelphia. Sammy Watkins, I think we forget. If you just took away his NFL career, he actually has an amazing profile. But you can't do that. But at the same time, he still plays with Patrick Mahomes. You're going to get a couple of really big games out of him this season. So I think he's worth snagging to look to if you should keep him or drop him week 1. John Ross, a lot of concern with T. Higgins stepping into the fold and also John Ross not getting re-signed. But I still think there's a chance for him to get high volume in this offense, and so I think he's someone that you can pick up and just see how week 1 turns out. If he doesn't get any playing time, drop him. But let's get a ton of playing time, and they do see him as just kind of that downfield threat. I think there's a use for that. I think Joe Burrow proved in the college that he's willing to chuck it downfield. So you never know. It could be definitely worth it. All right. Next one, back to DJ Weeze. Going a lot with late pick questions, drafting someone with an easy schedule, i.e. a Tyrod Taylor, and using them as trade bait for a QB-needy team, a viable strategy, or is it overthinking? I personally think it's overthinking. You're going to get a lot of people who really do look at kind of the first half of fantasy season because they like to gather assets. I think of things a lot more from a dynasty perspective. So looking at players from an early perspective isn't having perspective on things. I typically look at Dynasty in kind of a 3-year forecasting type of mentality, unless my team's just so bad or so good. No, I'm not drafting players to look at early season schedule to use as trade bait per se. All of my drafting is going to be value based drafting. So I did look because I did want to give you some type of answer on an early season schedule that I like, and I really like the Cardinals week 2 through 7. And so their schedule week 2 through 7 is the Redskins, Lions, Panthers, Jets, Cowboys, Seahawks, Dolphins. That is quite the opposite of a murderer's row of teams that they are going to be playing. The only team that I can see that's any decent there on defense potentially is the Cowboys. But you could scoop up a Kenyan Drake, a Christian Kirk, any of those players. I mean, I like all those players quite a bit, but you can grab any of those players and they may show out for that time frame and really get you ahead in a seasonal league with those first, for that first week. They can get you through those 5 weeks and really, anchor your team. So I really like that schedule there. Next up, back to Tart. Your wide receiver model has OBJ in 13th. Is higher than where some people seem to be taking him with the coaching and roster changes in Cleveland. Do you find this result likely? So, the answer is yes. I think it's really easy for us to forget how good Odell Beckham Jr. really is. I went and looked, and he's actually going 36th overall in both Dynasty and Redraft. Some of the players currently going ahead of him is Cortland Sutton, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, and Kenny Golladay. That seems absolutely outrageous to me for someone who had some of the most elite first few seasons in NFL history. Last season, he was injured in a ton of different ways. He had a torn abdomen, sports hernia, and he still had 133 targets and a 13.9 average depth of target. So I don't know what I'm missing here. I get there's some concern about last season and Jarvis Landry and Kareem Hunt, but I mean, he's still an absolute elite player with elite volume. And at the same time, with Stefanski coming in, everyone thinks that they're going to play this run-heavy offense, but I'm not sure that it wasn't Gary Kubiak that didn't have the reins on that offensive scheme. So, I think that people concerned about playing a run-heavy offense going forward, I think it's a fallacy, and I think they're going to be disappointed with how much they may be passing this upcoming year. So, yes, I do think OBJ, I think he can be a top 10 receiver. I'm really happy that the model ended up putting out that he was 13th because I think that may even be a little too high for him. Next question from the Rams fan. Similarly, you have OBJ and Landry both in the top 20 points per game. Expecting Baker Mayfield to be a top QB option this year. Yes. I do think that he will be a top QB option this year, and I would go as much to say I think he's a really sneaky QB1 coming into this year. So I'm getting this data from Player Profiler. His opportunity was unbelievable. He was number 4 in a statistic called money throws, which is if you're pressured and you make a completed throw or a clutch throw in a under 2-minute type of situation. He was number 4 in that. He was also number 6 in the NFL in red zone attempts and number 7 in deep ball throws. So the opportunity was all there. The issue was the efficiency. Where this starts to come into play is efficiency is it can be on the QB, but it's a lot more on the receiving core, right? So the way I like to think about quarterbacks is the opportunity is dictated by the offense. The efficiency is dictated by the cast. So there was a lot. OBJ, had some time out. He was injured. Jarvis Landry was technically his number one last year. Kareem Hunt spent a while out. They ran the ball. Nick Chubb. You have Rashard Higgins that is running around out there aimlessly. I think if you have a full cast going forward, I think he's going to be a lot more efficient because he was number 34 in completion percentage and number 50 in red zone completion percentage. And so, some of that does fall on Baker, and some of that does fall on his receiving cast. But you bring in Austin Hooper, you have a full season of Kareem Hunt. You're gonna have a lot better efficiency going forward. So I think he's a really sneaky Q. Okay, Corporal Casual. Sorry if I butcher any of your guys' names, by the way. With one and more front offices getting younger and more analytically driven, do you ever see a world where fantasy analytic experts get picked up by the real NFL? Yes, I do. It's happened, actually. Um, so I think that the fantasy football community and the NFL community are converging at a pretty quick rate here. The NFL is one of the most far behind sports in analytics, in my honest opinion. Obviously, baseball was one of the quickest to adopt it. NFL is starting to get a little more into it, but then you still see Bill O'Brien making trades like the way he does. You see people like Warren Sharp, who's out here, and he's consulting a few NFL teams. And then there was an individual, I can't remember what his name was, but last year he got picked up by the Ravens to be a part of their analytics team. Um, I don't see it as unlikely that you're going to start seeing more and more guys start to be picked up off the fantasy football streets and into actual NFL offices. So, good question. I do think that that's going to be something that happens pretty often. What is your favorite food to have at live drafts? Um, a huge pizza guy, also a big barbecue guy. I'm from Kansas City originally. I live down in Dallas now. Barbecue is something that I really love, and you can't go wrong with it at drafts. I will say this makes me a little fraudulent, but last few years we have a home league draft, and we all get together for a live draft, and we've actually gotten tacos the last few years. So can't go wrong with tacos. Do love tacos. I don't love tacos though. Um, Best question so far. Okay, is Miles Sanders a fantasy RB1? There's so much hype on this guy right now, and I've been kind of the one of the people that's lead this charge. And I know that my guy Chalk, he loves himself some Miles Sanders. He has so many shares of them at this point. So I hope so. I hope he's an RB1. I do have a few concerns. He was really good at the receiving aspect. And so that's kind of what it's going to have to be led with if he's going to be an RB1, because he was number 7 in receiving yards and number 12 in receptions last year. My concern is the dominator rating, which I've found is the second most predictable metric for fantasy points the following season, besides per game itself. He only had an 18% dominator rating. And once again, dominator is the percentage of rushing and receiving yards for a team. And that was it was number 40 last year in running backs, which is awful. And so that's kind of the concern, that everyone's been talking about is that volume, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get there. And then on top of that, as I was mentioning, he had some really good receiving opportunity, but I mean, they only have Greg Ward, they were throwing it to last year, and honestly, he only had a 75% catch rate, which is number 30 last year at the running back position. So even though he had a lot of receiving yards and a lot of receptions, he actually wasn't very good at converting those passes that were thrown his way. One of the things he was great at was his juke rate, but if you check out one of my latest tweets that kind of correlates running back single metrics to success the following year, juke rate was like third to last. So even though he had a 32.8 juke rate, that only has a 2% correlation to next season success. So it's cool stats to look at, but it really doesn't have any effect on next year's success. So not painting this morbid picture, but right now he's going 10.67, or so 10th overall in redraft and 13.4 in dynasty startups. And so he's going really, really high. And at this point, I think he's a little too expensive for me to pull the trigger on him at that point. So he's a really great player, and I hope he does well because there's so much hype, and I do think he's really talented. But there are those concerns there. How many more points will he get than Christian McCaffrey? From Wise Panzer of the Lake. It's a great question, Wise Panzer. And if anyone would like to make that bet with me that he will score more points than Christian McCaffrey, please DM me at Blake A. Hampton on Twitter. And I would love to make that bet with y'all. Okay. Next question from DJ Weeze. I appreciate all the questions, DJ Weeze. In the middle rounds of the draft, when trying to pick between two players, what's your deciding factor? Individual supporting cast, guy your rival wants, or something else? So this is kind of where I was kind of mentioning everything is really value based. Right? So if you want to go check out a really cool article, one of the guys at the Undroppables, his name is Jax, at Dino Game Theory. I would go check out his work. He wrote the theory of dynasty, and he kind of lays out how many starting players there are, in an actual fantasy football draft, and how many players you're going to want to get, prior to start getting into bench players. And so there are essentially 120 starting caliber players, and your job is to get as many of those as you possibly can. So when it comes to the middle rounds, you kind of want to think of it this way, right? Let's just say that the top 40 running backs and wide receivers have been drafted at this point. And right now you're trying to decide between a wide receiver and a running back. So last year, number 40 wide receiver was Robbie Anderson, and he had 162.3 points. Last year, number 40 for running backs was DeAndre Washington at 135.4 points. I'm trying to decide between those two players. You may sit here and think, oh, Robbie Anderson has, potentially 30 more points on DeAndre Washington. So it's an easy pick to go wide receiver there with Robbie Anderson. But you want to look at kind of your differential. Let's just assume that there's 20 picks between yours and the next time that you're going to be on the board. Let's just say that for the sake of this argument, that 20 of the same position has been picked between your pick and the next. So I'm looking at the difference between player number 40 and player number 60. So for wide receiver, Robbie Anderson was number 40, 162.3 points. And for wide receiver, Kenny Stills had 120.1 points last year. That's a difference of 42.2. And then you go to running back, number 40, DeAndre Washington, 135.4 points, and Alexander Madison, 68.4 points, number 60. And that is a difference of 67. Even though Robbie Anderson may have scored more points last year, the differential between player 40 and player 60 on wide receiver is significantly minuscule comparatively to the running backs, player number 40 through player 60. So that's what I'm talking about when you're talking about value-based drafting. You want to look at kind of the differential between player against their own position compared to the player against another position. So that's kind of how I'm evaluating things. A middle round standpoint is you want to look at kind of the differential position and where that positional scarcity is going to start lying and start extracting value from there. And that's kind of on the redraft dynasty, value-based drafting, positional scarcity, and understanding the appreciation and depreciation of assets. Because, these players, every one that you draft is going to be considered an asset, and you can utilize them how you one of the things that I kind of started working on is a age production curve. I'm going to tell you when kind of the maximum of their performance is going to be compared to their age. So that's something that we're kind of working on right now. Right. Question: MT only catches plants. What do you think? What QB do you think will be picked late or undrafted and have a nice or even big top 5 year? I think Mahomes 2 years ago, Lamar last year. I really don't see any this year. I do see one could be really sneaky, but this isn't anyone you're going to want to draft at the same time that those guys were, and that's Ryan Fitzpatrick. I love me some Fitzmagic. Obviously, this is assuming that Tua is going to be out for the entire year. So last year, Ryan Fitzpatrick was top 10 in every single rushing metric that can be charted. attempts, touchdowns, yard carry, red zone carries, etc. So he was running for his life and doing it efficiently, and he was doing it a lot. And I am a believer in the Konami code quarterbacks, which obviously, higher rushing quarterbacks. Obviously, for the reasons that 10 yards is the equivalent of 50 yards, or 10 yards rushing is the equivalent of 50 yards passing. So when you start to do that math, it's much easier for these rushing quarterbacks to get a lot more points, i.e., example, Lamar Jackson and how many points he raked up comparatively to the rest of the last year or so. Ryan Fitzpatrick, their defense is still going to be bad. He's really productive, and now he's going to get Preston Williams back. Another year of Mike Gesicki being in the league. Devontae Parker finally figuring it out. So, yeah, I think that Ryan Fitzpatrick is really sneaky to be a top 10 quarterback if he's able to play the whole year. Samuel L. Jackson. How do you see touches being distributed in the Miami backfield, and will it produce a fantasy relevant running back? No. That is the grossest running back or running back room in the NFL. So when you look at it, you have Jordan Howard, Matt Breida, and Patrick Laird. So Jordan Howard is probably going to lead the team in carries. He's there and he's going to plot his way to 200-something carries next year, and it's going to be really gross to watch. Patrick Laird isn't going away. He's going to be, the passing down player. I feel pretty good in that. They seem to really like him in that role last year. He was just a rookie last year, so I think that he's going to step it up quite a bit. And then there's Matt Breida, and he's probably the most talented running back. But where does he fit in? I'm not really sure, to be honest, unless one of those players go down. I think it's just going to be this really jumbled mess and really gross. So, yeah, gross team, gross running offense. I just don't – it's not something that I'm wanting to invest in at any point. Sure, you can draft a player to trade them for people that feel good about Matt Breida, but I think it's going to be a really gross situation there. Next, from Tater Nanner 23. Do you think Kenyan Drake has a top 10 running back season in full PPR? No, I don't. I know people are really bullish on Kenyan Drake. I see him as potentially a top 15 running back. Actually, people really questioned the offensive line last year, but he actually had one of the top run blocking efficiency offensive lines last year, at 91.5 run blocking efficiency. That is actually top 5 in the NFL. And while doing that, he only had a 0.5 breakaway runs per game last season, which actually put him around 35th last year in the NFL. And then on top of that, he only had 5 goal line carries. I know that he kind of was bought into his own there in the season, but you'd really like to see a player with a lot more goal line carries if they're going to be kind of that featured back. And so there's kind of this concern, and it's not like Chase Edmonds is going to go away, and they brought in Benjamin. And Benjamin was a 7th round pick, but he was still a pick regardless. They used draft capital on a running back. And so, there's a chance that Kenyan Drake isn't on this team next year. And so they may start thinking about the future. There's a lot of situations there. He did have a 26.1 dominator rating, which is top 15 in the NFL. But there's nothing here that's indicating to me that he is going to get opportunity and he has the talent to be a top 10 running back. Especially, it's a really talented running back group. It's going to beat out Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs. Is going to beat out any of these players? I don't think so. Okay. Next question from Tater Nanner 23. Also, why do you have guys why do you have Holiday projected to be 19th overall wide receiver considering the great numbers he put up last year? So that's a good question. And so one of the things that I do have to clarify is that the models that I'm putting out, they're not subjective. It's all a mathematical model. So I'm putting data into a spreadsheet, and then it is calculating out a number that is predicting points per game that these players are going to have for this next season. And so he did have a good season. I guess he really didn't have much target competition, especially once Marvin Jones went away. And then on top of that, he only had 116 targets
It's kind of a lower volume passing attack these days. They're running a lot more. They just brought in DeAndre Swift to go along with Kerryon Johnson. So he only had 116 targets with no competition. He only had 8 red zone opportunities. That's still not great. And then TJ Hawkinson is coming back fully healthy. Um, Real ding in the model was that he only had a 70% catch rate of catchable targets. That is so bad. So I don't know what's going on there. If he's catch the ball, I'm not a huge film grinder, so it's not like I'm observing these stats really deep. But a 70% catch rate of catchable targets, that's so bad. Um, really deep group of wide receivers this year. So you know, there's a concern that he really falls out. People are drafting him as like a top 10 wide receiver, and you have elite level wide receivers that will get higher volume than him, and that's kind of the concern there is his terrible catch rate and potentially lower volume with all these passing options coming back. So that's where the model has him dinged. Right. Thanks for the questions there. Richie Unknown. We all know that there is a lot of luck involved in fantasy football, but what is one finding you've made that is the most predictable result? Can you point to a particular player or a group of players in 2020 that this applies to? So if you're looking at single metrics, there's really only two things you can look at. For rookies, it's draft capital, and then also points per game. Fantasy points per game correlates best to fantasy points per game, which sounds stupid, but that's really the best that it is. What I've found is that you really need to combine several metrics in order to get over the predictiveness of points per game the season prior. So there's not a single metric that you can find that's going to give you like this really great correlating factor. I guess the two, if you're gonna put me on the spot, so I'm not cherry picking, is the dominator rating or weighted opportunities running back. And so weighted opportunities is the rushing attacks or rushing attempts plus passing attempts, and it's putting a premium on passing attempts because they're giving you more points per game, points per attempt than rushing attempts. And then also, and for wide receivers, it is yards per offensive passing attempt. So those are kind of the two metrics I guess you can cherry pick, but really it's just combining several metrics together using regression or any other type of statistical analysis. You've gone back and retroactively applied this algorithm to past drafts, and this is from SpaceGhost Force. Appreciate it, man. Have you gone back and retroactively applied this algorithm to past drafts 20 years ago? It was able to make accurate predictions, even with the different rules, tackling rule changes favoring the offensive players now. And I'll go and read the other question too. And if it's based more off current situations, how far back would you say it still would have been a great predictor of success? Yeah, so I don't have data from that far back to be able to run the algorithm, the model up against those. Just kind of thinking about it from a logical standpoint, it's not going to change because it's not really based on volume, right? So the biggest thing that I would say is a lot of this stuff is going to be based primarily on volume, passing attempts. Those are going to be the things that are changing. Is kind of the way that the NFL has changed its offensive strategy, and none of this really has to do with volume. It's more of like how much percentage of offensive efficiency or production does player X meet with that team. So that's going to be a lot more what it's based around. There are targets that is included when you're looking at predicting wide receiver points per game, but that's not going to necessarily change because everyone's targets are changing. It's not just like one team's targets are changing. That would make a difference. Overall, the entire situation of teams are going to be changing, so everything else will adjust at an equal rate, not end up not changing anything. So I would say that the correlation would stay pretty stagnant had I gone back years on this thing. But I do go back 5 years at least to make sure that I do have enough of the sample size to confirm that what I find. Which Pats tight end is better for Dynasty, Asiasi or Keen? I am so hyped for Dalton. Asiasi was the higher draft pick, but tight ends these days, if you're looking for someone who's going to be kind of a fantasy relevant player, you're not wanting someone who runs 5-yard button hooks and falls down. And if you ever watch Asiasi or look even at his production profile, that's exactly what he's going to be. He's going to run 5-yard button hooks. He's going to turn around. They're going to throw him the ball. He's going to fall over. Dalton Keene actually has, so I'm gonna read this off here, a 71st percentile 40-yard dash, a 72nd percentile speed score, a 74th percentile burst score, an 85th percentile agility score, and a 73rd percentile catch radius. He has above 50 percentile in all of those categories there, in all the major workout metrics that's charted. And when you're looking at kind of a sleeper tight end, you want someone who's going to be athletically, is going to be able to catch the ball and run with it after the catch. I mean, you think of all the elite tight ends that are going on today. You think of the Mark Andrews. You think of the George Kittle, the Travis Kelce's. They all have elite yard after catch. So it's someone that I think has a lot more potential in the passing game. And I think it's someone that we're going to be looking at and thinking, oh, just him and his mustache. So I think he's a really good option, and I think it's someone that we can really start looking towards. Doc, thank you. I appreciate this question. I feel like I've kind of answered it. Miles Sanders or Clyde EdwardsHelaire. Why? So looking just at college profile, you're going to be disappointed that it looks like Clyde EdwardsHelaire has a pretty significantly higher advantage in terms of college production profile compared to Miles Sanders. And as I said before, I mean, people can make the argument that Saquon Barkley was in front of Miles Sanders and Nick Prosett was in front of Clyde EdwardsHelaire. I don't really care because they both played one season. They both had one really great season. But Clyde EdwardsHelaire had a much better season, even taking away the stats that are meaningful to like offensive volume. So looking at things in a vacuum, Miles Sanders is obviously a lot more athletic, having one of the highest speed scores in the NFL currently. I think that he's a much better athlete, and honestly, in a vacuum, I think that Miles Sanders is probably a better player. But when you look at production profiles, situation, and kind of charting what their statistics are going to be this next year, I don't see how you can put Miles Sanders ahead of Clyde EdwardsHelaire at this point. I think there's enough of an athletic profile, especially enough comps there, athletic comps for Clyde EdwardsHelaire, that you're not too concerned about that, plus being in the high production in an elite offense. I just don't see how you can possibly put him ahead of Miles Sanders, or how you can put Miles Sanders ahead of Clyde EdwardsHelaire at this point. Okay, next question from the Rams fan. Have Juju ranked at wide receiver 31 and Deante Johnson outside of your top 50? Are you expecting Big Ben to be bad this season, or are you predicting that he doesn't play the full season? Yeah, so this has been kind of the biggest complaint that I've been getting about the model that I put out, the points per game model forecasting next season, is that Juju Smith-Schuster is way too low. And I would agree. I think he will definitely be in my top 30 for this upcoming season, which I know is people are having him in their top 10. I think there's a concern about like how good is Big Ben going to be when he gets back. He had surgery on his elbow. That doesn't sound like a very good thing. And then you have players who are really kind of coming into their own, such as James Washington and Deante Johnson. He now has a pretty high teammate score in terms of players that are there. I think they're still going to run the ball a ton. They have a really good defense, and so I think that they're going to find themselves running the ball quite a bit. I still think Juju is an elite wide receiver. I just don't see how this upcoming year, so many good players, like do I Do I put him ahead of DJ Shark, who's the definitive number one? Do we put him ahead of AJ Brown? Do we put him ahead of Terry McLaurin? I mean, some people may say that that's an easy yes, but I don't. I just don't see the volume being there. And I mean, if they're able to move him back into the slot, then that's something else. But I don't know if that's what's going to happen. So, Deante Johnson, I'm not a huge fan. Really rising on Deante Johnson. And at this point, I would take Darius Slayton over him. Deante Johnson, one of his best traits is target separation, and I found that has zero correlation to fantasy points per game. So it's not really anything. I think that they'll all kind of cannibalize their own targets and end up all being average. But I sure hope that Juju ends up being a top fantasy player this upcoming year. Between this is from Blaint. Between Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, who do you see having the better fantasy season and why? Assuming this is a half PPR league. I think it was just a year ago that Robert Woods was the top 10 wide receiver. This last year he was a top 30 in the 30s. I personally see it looks like they're going to be using a lot more 2 tight end sets, and it seems like Cooper Kupp was kind of faded out of the scene last year. But there's 2 things that's kind of interesting to look at here, and it is there are now 70 red zone touches that are vacated from Todd Gurley leaving. 70 red zone touches per year. The biggest producer of red zone targets last year was Cooper Kupp. He had a 35% target share in the red zone. So even though Cooper Kupp may not play as many snaps, does that mean that he's not going to take 30% of those red zone touches comparatively to Robert Woods, who had a 15% red zone target share? I think in a half PPR, in a PPR, I think Robert Woods is going to end up being the better player. I think that he's a better, and when I say better player, I don't mean necessarily better fantasy producer. I think he's going to be a much better value comparatively to where their ADPs are currently between Robert Woods and I think you're going to be able to draft Robert Woods in the 5th, 6th round, and you're going to be much happier than if you're drafting Cooper Kupp in the 4th. So that's kind of where I see these players finishing out. Right, next, T Money 21. If you apply your personal thoughts to the wide receiver predictive model, who would you draft first in 0.5 PPR, Lockett or DK? Also, would Deshaun Jackson crack your top 50? I don't think it's very close. I think Lockett is much better than DK Metcalf. Right now in the model I have, we have Tyler Lockett at year 14, and then we have DK Metcalf at 25. And I think that's probably pretty right. I think Lockett has been the security blanket for Russell Wilson for so long. I think that the Seahawks defense isn't going to be great this year, so they're going to air it out a lot more. And I think Lockett is in for a really great season. So I think DK Metcalf's a really good player. I think he's a fantastic player in Dynasty. At this point, am I ready to say that DK is going to take over Lockett? Especially in a 0.5 PPR or PPR league. That's not anything that I'm confident saying. So, all right. Next, from T Money 21. All the talk surrounding the Indy backfield is centered around Marlon Mack versus Jonathan Taylor. And to think that Hines will have a sneaky good year catching passes from Rivers, you agree that he dominates the receiving work from the backfield. Do you think that alone is enough to make him fantasy relevant this year in the Indy offense? Okay, so first, Reich put out a quote saying that there will be games that Hines gets all these touches, and I think that was misquoted. And I think the exact quote says something along the lines of, he may go games without getting 0 touches and then one game having 10 touches. And so I think there was kind of some misrepresentation of the quote to get some clicks. But with that said, that if you want to look at the production curve from Nyheim Hines from 2 years ago to last year, his involvement in the offense went down significantly, including in the passing game. And Marlon Mack's volume in the passing game went up a ton, but it did go up. And one of the biggest fallacies that's kind of happened, and one of the strangest things for me that's happened, is the thought that Marlon Mack has just kind of become this plotting on receiving running back, when actually he was one of the best receiving running backs that was coming out of the draft that year. So I'm not sure how he kind of got this title of not being able to catch the ball, but he really can. He's actually really good at it. And so I think that Nyheim Hines is going to be the primary pass catcher in Indianapolis, probably. Do I see him playing enough that it's going to be relevant? No, I don't. I think that Nyheim Hines is getting kind of faded out of this offense. I think that Reich really has an idea that he wants Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor to play. And looking at kind of a time series analysis from year over year, Nyheim Hines' opportunity is going in the wrong direction. For me to think that he's going to get a ton of work. So I just don't see that happening. And I do think that Marlon Mack is one of the best buys, one of the cheapest buys out there right now. I do think he's going to have a part of this offense. And I do think it'll be more significant than people want, especially with Jonathan Taylor on his team. Okay, SpaceGhost Force. I love the A-Rob Spice. Feel like he's always been the pick that isn't pretty, but the right one. We're drafting, how far would you reach, or where would you place his ranking in the ranges we've seen published, anywhere from wide receiver 11 through 24? And so I see Allen Robinson is a wide receiver 1 this year. And kind of as I mentioned, the thing that correlates most to wide receiver success is opportunity. And so you may have his best quarterback that he's ever played with in Nick Foles, which is really sad. I see Allen Robinson being a wide receiver 1 this year. I would take him, and I'm just talking primarily in redraft, but I would take him probably ahead of maybe Mike Evans. I'd probably take him above Mike Evans at this point, which may be a little hot takey, but I just think that there's too much volume, too much talent, too much opportunity for him not to be a wide receiver 1 at this point. He has no target competition. He just eats up all those targets, and who knows how good their defense is actually going to be this year. So that may be a little spicy, but I'm really excited for him this year. East Coast Force. Next question. Boyd at 17 and AJ Green at 33. Is that a reflection more on the current depth chart or injury history or all the above, because AJ has a ton of variables, whereas Boyd was great value last year? This is a really good question. People are really upset about this one too. And one of the things that I look at when I do this stuff is an age production curve, as I kind of mentioned, and it kind of lays out what the production will be with age. And so this was kind of one where you start to look at Boyd. He's starting to reach his age apex as a wide receiver. AJ Green is starting to tail off as a wide receiver. You have injuries that are starting to pile up. People can start to use the narrative that AJ Green is really good and can be a safety blanket for Joe Burrow, but why can't Tyler Boyd? I mean, look at Tyler Boyd. I'm going to pull up his stats real fast from last year. But Tyler Boyd had 147 targets last year. 147. That was one of the top in the NFL last year, having 147 targets. And then on top of that, not only that, but he had quite a few red zone receptions. He had a really high catch rate of catchable targets, over 84%. And then a very low average depth of target of 8.2. And so you start to look at that. I mean, the safety blanket may be Tyler Boyd, with him going on these shorter routes. He may play slot again, this upcoming year. I think that there's a higher opportunity that Boyd's going to see a lot more volume than AJ Green, especially at this point in their career, and the injury concerns. That may be another hot take. People are really excited about AJ Green coming back. But I think Boyd is one of the best guys right now, one of the most underrated players going into this next season. All right. Which player ranking in your model do you find most unlikely? There are quite a few, actually, that I find unlikely. think Julian Edelman is a top 30 wide receiver, maybe a tough sell. I mean, there may be opportunity for Stidham to kind of find that connection early. And Julian Edelman's kind of been the epitome of consistency, but they have him all the way up at 21, and I think that's a little bit bullish. I don't see that necessarily playing out. Then also, I think I talked about it before. There's two wide receivers that are outside of the top 30 that I think will be in the top 30, and that is Juju Smith-Schuster and Adam Thielen. I hate the phrase "too many mouths to feed" and vacated targets, but it's kind of the opposite situation that's going on in Minnesota, and I think there's going to be a ton of targets that are headed Thielen's way this next season. I think there's too much opportunity for him not to kind of take over that high volume role there. Okay, next from Tyruzi. The young up-and-coming receivers from last year, Shark, DK, A.J. Brown, Aaron McLaurin, Preston Williams, who do you think has a better season this year? I'm excited about all of them. Every single player you just listed, I'm really excited for them. I really, really like DJ Shark coming into this next year. I think the connection, I think this is a little bit of a narrative, but I think the connection between him and Gardner Minshew is real. And I do think that they're going to be really good together. Not only that, but he had 117 targets and then an average depth of target of 12.4 yards, even with someone who may not be launching the ball down the field. He's still having a really high average depth of target there. And then you start to look, he actually was, I didn't really think of him as much of a red zone threat, but he had 9 red zone targets, which is really good for a player of his kind. So I think that there's not much target competition. Who knows about the Leonard Fournette situation there? So he may be in for a ton of volume. Like I said, obviously I love all those players. Preston Williams is probably the cheapest right now, and he's a really sneaky player to put out a really productive season coming year. All right. I have not read any of these, so these may be a little bit off the cuff here. Burnells, what are your thoughts on David Johnson this year? I think he's washed up, and I think that he will get points off of just pure opportunity. I think that you're asking about the wrong D Johnson. I think that Duke Johnson, I think there's a high possibility Duke Johnson ends up with a better fantasy season than David Johnson. A lot of people are kind of getting excited about the whole David Johnson workload. But I'm really excited about Duke Johnson. I think this is finally the year that he'll get that opportunity that we all want. Yeah. Okay. Next one. In a dynasty startup where rookies are in draft, is getting both the rookie and the veteran running back, such as Ingram and Dobbins, a good strategy? Yeah. I mean, it's not a bad strategy. One of the strategies that I think it may be Jay Zachariah goes out is one for now and one for later. And so that's a really smart strategy when drafting, is if you're going to be drafting like rookies who may not play right away, your next pick, you're going to want to pick a player who, is going to be playing with opportunity. And so that kind of balances out your team. If you try it, you'll look at your team and you're really going to like it. So I would highly suggest trying that strategy, the one for now, one for later type of approach. I think that you kind of stacking those running backs is a good way to do that. I wouldn't go into a draft like planning that, because as I said, everything is based on value-based drafting. I wouldn't force a draft pick just so you can stack running backs together. Denny's hot take. Expanding on the Fitz question, do you see any value of drafting the top pieces of split backfields, such as Ingram and Dobbins? Or I guess that's kind of the same question there. Blanked. With Hooper gone, do you see Hurst filling in the shoes and putting up 2019 Hooper-like numbers? It's possible, I guess. I think we've seen that Falcons really do like their tight ends, and I think I put out a tweet the other day that without Julio, and if you take away Julio and Calvin Johnson, or just kind of take their receiving yards, there are officially 2,057 yards that are up for grabs between players that are left. So that could go to Hayden Hurst, that could go to Russell Gage, that could go to his name, Laquan Treadwell, that could go to Todd Gurley. And so, I mean, playing the odds there, they're high odds that one of these players is actually going to be a pretty good value in fantasy football this upcoming. So yeah, this has been. I think there's a really good chance that Hurst is a viable option, but I think there's a lot of options on the Falcons that you can take a look at and say, what, they're going to be a value this year because I'm getting them for dirt cheap. N'Keal Harry viable this year / moving forward, or is he dead? He's dead. I just don't see a world where N'Keal Harry succeeds. And so one of the things that I put out is I did a correlation between second year wide receivers, their college production and their college production profile and their first year of success. And what you find is you actually find it's really correlating to how successful they are throughout their career. And N'Keal Harry was actually really low on this list. He was with like Deante Johnson and Mecole Hardman, lower than Deante Johnson, and like the Mecole Hardman and Kelvin Harmon range around there. So yeah, I think he's done for at this point. So I would sell high on him if I were you. I don't see a world where he blows up and becomes anything unless he has kind of a Devontae Parker type of resurgence in a year or two. All right. Well, I guess that is all, guys. I appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun. If you guys have any more questions, please my DMs are open. Please feel free to ask me. Please make sure that you go follow the Undroppables. As I said, we have some really cool content. Podcast is coming out soon. And hope to talk with you guys again soon. Thanks for having me on SpaceGhost Force. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.